Members, Irimi Dorthy Hirna, Ganal Nefra Corfuing. Con sin Steward and Organever, August Nartha Grosta, Vrona Uring. Connie the Hurt Con Crehe, Onus Goruicha, Hosno Ferrar, or Neelavor, August Arnila Gurnea Fasta, August Gortre, the Correct No Freed, Tre Christ Art Hirna. Amen. Direct we beseech thee, O Lord, our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every word and work of ours may always begin from thee and by thee be happily ended. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you, members. And good afternoon. And now we'll take leaders' questions under Standing Order 38, starting with Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
Taoiseach, 4 weeks into a crisis that has seen fuel prices skyrocket, and only now have you brought forward limited measures to respond. It's taken relentless pressure from Sinn Féin and massive public anger to force you to act. Because you watched on as fuel prices spun out of control. You sat back as working people struggled to heat their homes and to fill their cars. And when households needed a government of action, they got your do-nothing government. Clearly, Taoiseach, your plan was to ride this one out. Your package today had to be dragged out of you. And still, you come to the table with half measures. You couldn't bring yourself to provide the maximum support that people need. Taoiseach, your reductions in motor fuel don't go far enough. You have it in your power to deliver the maximum excise cut possible on diesel, a similar cut for petrol, and to remove excise entirely from home heating oil. Motorists have been hammered for a month at the pumps, and you could have done more, but instead you choose to shortchange people. However, your standout failure is on home heating oil. You have literally abandoned the 750,000 households that rely on home heating oil. The price of a fill of home heating oil has doubled in a matter of weeks. So a measly cut of 2 cents a litre is an insult. It amounts only to a €20 reduction on a fill that now costs around €1,700, a drop in the tank. And of course, in any event, you'll take this back from people anyway when you hike up carbon tax in just a few weeks. So you give with one hand only to take back with the other. You could have and should completely remove excise on home heating oil. That would provide these households with a meaningful relief, but instead you choose to leave them high and dry. And once again, when it comes to the crunch, you sell working people short with weak half measures. But that's Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil all over. Your measure on fuel allowance is paltry, Taoiseach. It's extending the payment by 4 weeks won't make a dent in these massive fuel price hikes. Cur Sinn Féin equal of buga, Ferrer Tobartus Fianna Fáil agus Fine Gael Module le diesel agus petrol I wad ro bheog I gumparod le cod atá a tastal. I gos chowli atá bra ola cheasa tá sé trécha. Beg Sinn Féin ag brú le haig fear gníomh anocht. Taoiseach, these soaring fuel prices are a real emergency for households requiring real action, not the half measures that you present today. And we won't watch on as you let people down again. People who have to get to work in the morning, carers who have to get to the people that they look after, people with disabilities who, remember, were left €1,400 worse off in your budget. So we will move an amendment to your financial resolution to deliver the maximum excise cut possible for diesel, a similar cut for petrol, to completely remove excise and strip away carbon tax from home heating oil. And that's the difference, Taoiseach, between you and me. I believe that when families are to the pin of their collar and when government can intervene, it should. No delays, no excuses, just action.
Taoiseach to respond.
Ní aon tíim leis an tachtain agus sé tá fií cabad le an rialtas ná cabhar agus tacaíocht a thabhairt do dhaoine ícom íseal agus na daoine is buíochta sa tír agus sin é an fá go bhfuil ó thaobh cuasaí leas a thoisiúlaigh de cabhar agus tacaíocht a thabhairt doing. Agus mar aon le sin don Childcare College chomá níos mó cabhar agus tacaíocht a thabhairt dóibh siúd mar tá sí riachtanach ó thaobh cuasaí geilge na tíre. Deputy, this is a moment of great instability and uncertainty in the world. And the war in the Middle East has created, without question, the greatest oil supply shock ever in the history of the markets. And that is a very sobering and significant reality that has to be taken on board by any responsible government. We have no intention of being reckless with this crisis or irresponsible with this crisis. We want to be flexible. We want to give supports to people. No government, every government is limited in terms of what it can do in situations like this. And all of the international advice from all of the ECB, IMF and so on is to target temporary, affordable measures, because we don't quite know what's around the corner in terms of how this unfolds, both in terms of the war itself, but also in terms of the Hormuz Strait, in terms of the impact on oil and gas installations that have already been destroyed, where there will be a lag time now, a couple of years, before some of those are restored to capacity. So the wise thing to do is to introduce measures of the kind we've introduced today that are targeted and that give some degree of universal supports in terms of the reduction in excise and petrol duties. And that's important. And then there's a very specific measure for the haulage industry, which you wouldn't support and you were warning us against doing yesterday. And the reason we are doing that is the haulage industry is central to our trading and to our economy, absolutely central. And it's extremely important that over the midterm that we make sure structurally that we create a sustainable haulage industry into the future to underpin what is a very strong exporting economy. And so those are the targeted nature of this. The fuel allowance has been extended for 4 weeks, which will take us up to the 1st of May. And I think any reasonable person would say that by that stage, yes, climate does change, the weather changes and so on like that, we will be in a warmer situation. And that's a logical thing to do, to target about 470,000 families who are on low incomes. I know you oppose that. You believe in really allocating about 2 to 3 billion right now. And what do we do in October? What do we do in December? If the consequences of this crisis continue. We have a budget coming up. We want to protect investment for services in education and in health, in children, right across the board. And these are real choices we have to make. And I'm sure you must realise that yourself. I think it's probably one of the more generous packages being developed across Europe. And indeed, I don't know what instructions you've given to your own ministers in Northern Ireland. I think they're a total of £30 is the only benefit to upcoming bills that you're giving. You can't decide where an additional 17 million that is available is to go. So you've two ministers in charge of this brief in Northern Ireland, and I would just ask you, compare their performance to what we're doing here. It's no comparison. And poor enough leadership from your party who are in charge of that operation. But from our point of view, I think these are temporary measures. We do need to retain some degree of flexibility in terms of how this situation unfolds in the coming weeks and months.
You know, Taoiseach, you're always so shocked and so outraged when it's a case of families and working people needing support. That's such an outrageous thing to say. That's so unsustainable. It's always so unaffordable, even when the government coffers are full. Of course, you take a very different view when it's developers or big bankers or big corporate interests. Mind them every day of the week. But when the families come knocking on the door and when they're under pressure, that's a different story. How very, very telling, how very, very Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. It is not wise to leave 750,000 households who rely on home heating oil in the lurch. It is not wise to shortchange workers, carers, people who have to get out and about their business, families and people already who were to the pin of their collar in a cost of living crisis. Where is the wisdom of that? Not alone is it stingy and mean and detached, above all else, it reveals your political priorities. And by God, it's not the working men and women of this country.
With the greatest respect, the only party of late that has been courting bankers and developers in every sort of corporate financial operation is yourselves, particularly in the United States, where you've raised a hell of a lot of money from developers and from builders. So really spare lecturing everybody else about fundraising from developers and bankers and everybody, because you've been doing it on a serial basis for many, many years in the United States and in Northern Ireland and in UK and elsewhere. And you speak out of both sides of your mouth when it comes to all of that playbook that you just regurgitate every time there's an event or a crisis in the world. And so we don't take your approach. And we do. That's what we're exactly doing here. We're targeting our measures on the fuel allowance, which will help poorer families and low-income working families from the impact of the increases in home heating oil and in other energy products. And that has been our focus, and indeed in the budget it was our focus, where we had a very strong, and the SRI bears this out in terms of the low-income deciles, benefiting the most from, you're not leader yet, Deputy, I keep on saying you're not leader of the party, don't be interrupted.
Time is up.
But the bottom line is, the evidence is there that we looked after the lowest income groups and through the household benefit scheme as well, which was substantially improved as a result of the budget.
Taoiseach, the illegal war on Iran launched by Trump and Netanyahu is now in its 4th week, and households across the country are reeling from the energy crisis. Petrol and diesel prices now well over €2 per litre, and those reliant on home heating oil particularly badly affected, facing massive price increases as the cost of refilling a 1,000-litre tank gets to €1,800. So in the face of this, your government's package of measures to support struggling households, which you've described as generous, it's simply not enough. Too little and very late, Taoiseach. True, the excise and levy cuts to fuel prices will give relief to some, as will extension of the fuel allowance. But there are hundreds of thousands of households already in arrears on energy bills. And no real reassurance here for far too many. One woman who emailed me just before I came in here to convey what she described as her disgust and deep unhappiness. As a working single parent, she says, with her last electricity bill at €637, she says there is nothing in this package of measures for her. So for her and for so many more, Taoiseach, we need longer-term thinking. We need measures from your government that will ensure energy security and that will tackle climate change too. Labour have championed a real right to remote and flexible working, and the IEA are telling us this is what we need to do, to pivot to this, to pivot to real investment in cycling and public transport, to decarbonise our economy and our society, as Deputy Jed Nash has said. And this is imperative in the week when the World Meteorological Organization say 2025 was the worst year on record for climate change. Taoiseach, last Thursday you attended the European Council in Brussels. There you would have heard Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez speaking about how Spain is less exposed to this huge energy shock than other European countries. Why? Because they pivoted early to renewables. Last week, 60% of Spain's electricity was generated through renewables. The price of electricity per kilowatt hour is well over €100 here. The equivalent price in Spain, just €14. An extraordinary difference. In Brussels myself last Thursday, I spoke with Sanchez, with Climate Commissioner Teresa Ribera, because the Spanish left government have shown robust leadership within the EU, strongly condemning the US and Israel for the attacks on Iran, and also showing leadership, real leadership on climate action. And that's what we need from your government, real leadership. Clearly, the best way to address the crisis is to stop the war, and European leaders should now unite to condemn the war, to challenge Trump on his so-called little excursion, to stand up to this erratic and dangerous leader, not hand him a bowl of shamrock in the White House. But while the war continues, We must ensure, the government must ensure, that struggling households are protected, and we must strive harder to shift from fossil fuels. So, Taoiseach, will you join with the Spanish socialists in condemning the US-Israel war? Will you work with EU leaders to stand up to Trump, to stand up to this bully and seek an end to the war? And will you ensure that struggling households are really supported through this crisis, and that we now move urgently to end our reliance on fossil fuels?
Please.
First of all, Deputy, people are under a lot of pressure, and I would acknowledge that. That's without question in terms of the impact of this crisis, in terms of the cost of energy resulting from this war. No question about that. And government is limited in terms of how it can comprehensively. Governments cannot compensate for every single person in society. I'm sure you'd acknowledge that. And we need to have a realistic assessment and discussion about this. But what we can do is to try and protect those on the lowest incomes, and also protect people generally and give them some supports and try and reduce the impact of this crisis. And the reduction in excise duty does that. Not totally, but at least it helps and it takes a bit of pressure off people. But we acknowledge fully that it doesn't deal with the scale of the increases in the excise duty, generally home heating oil, or indeed in petrol prices. But the focus on the fuel allowance, I think, does help with home heating oil, as in combination also, of course, with the work in terms of the reduction in the NORA levy as well. And remember, the substantial household benefits package, about 420 million, or sorry, 420 euros annually for electricity and gas. The supplementary welfare allowance is there for people in real need, and I know the Minister for Social Protection has spoken to community welfare officers and to his department to make sure that they're responsive to anybody in need. And we are looking towards the autumn budget in terms of how we can develop mechanisms to connect what we do on fuel poverty allowances with arrears. And that's something that we have to focus on and work on, that there's a direct connection and that we can get those arrears down for people. In terms of the renewable story, Ireland has been very fast in recent years, probably the fastest growing in terms of renewable energy. And what happened in Spain and Portugal is, yeah, they have a higher level of renewables, and during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they managed to get a separate agreement from the EU in respect of the price structures governing prices in the Iberian Peninsula. There was a lot of discussion at the EU Council meeting last week. It's not that the assessment from the Commission is that the connection between gas and the pricing levels and defining the price levels is not easily broken. And that is a challenge for Europe more generally, because it is a key determinant in terms of the overall price of energy. And you know the four component parts, so we've acted on one of those four component parts, which is taxes and levies. And the ECB spoke to the EU Council meeting, the Euro Summit chair spoke to and they recommended, as per IMF advice, targeted, temporary, affordable measures, and they warned that we don't know what's around the corner, so therefore we do have to keep something in the reserve if things deteriorate even further over the next couple of months.
Well, look, Taoiseach, of course the Labour Party supports introduction of short-term measures to support struggling households. I think everyone does. Everyone acknowledges that here. But this package is just not enough. You could do more. But look at it this way, Taoiseach. Last year in the budget, the full year cost of the tax cut you gave to hospitality, to the burger barons that Deputy Nash speaks about, that cost is €680 million. That's three times the package that you're offering struggling households now, in what you've said yourself is the biggest energy shock we've seen in the world. I mean, it's just not enough, Taoiseach. And you've acknowledged yourself the reality of fuel poverty for far too many households across the country, the reality of the hundreds of thousands of households in arrears already on electricity and gas bills. You must acknowledge, Taoiseach, the desperate overexposure of Ireland on the LNG front. We're so reliant on LNG, we're so reliant on fossil fuels, and we're simply not acting fast enough to roll out renewables in the way we should. We know that takes a little more time, but we need to see commitment from government on this. And here's one very quick ask the IEA have called for. Move now to a real right for remote and flexible working. That's one way to support struggling households.
There's a lot of flexible remote working in our economy already, and particularly in the public service is quite significant, the degree of remote working that's prevalent now. But again, you attack the reduction of VAT for hospitality. That supports a lot of minimum wage workers in our economy, people you should be supporting and defending as a Labour Party. But not everybody in the hospitality is on the minimum wage. But nonetheless, it was about protecting jobs in an important domestic sector of our economy. And particularly with changing job profiles with AI and everything else, it's important that tourism and hospitality is protected and looked after. And that's what we did in the budget. And in terms of LNG, I mean, the most important thing you were saying about energy security, the LNG facility is required from an energy security perspective. Absolutely, it's not nonsense. It's rubbish to suggest we shouldn't put in an LNG facility in this country. Absolutely nonsense in terms of, sorry, if anything happened to gas connectors in this country with the United Kingdom, this economy wouldn't survive beyond 10 days. That's the reality. That's the advice we've received from an energy security. But you have to twist it, not you personally. But it gets twisted, it gets spun as an anti-climate measure.
Deputy
it's
Keane
anything
O'Callaghan.
but that. It's an energy security and an economic security.
Deputy Keane O'Callaghan.
Nearly months into this crisis, and the government is finally acting. But measures that have been announced today do not go far enough. A temporary cut to excise duty to provide some relief at the pumps is long overdue. But where are the targeted supports for those who need them most? Your government, having spent weeks and weeks reviewing the situation, has come in here today and is doing the bare minimum. You're extending the fuel allowance for a few weeks, but it barely scratches the surface of what is required to support people who are struggling the most. Taoiseach, there is almost nothing in this package for low-income households who are reliant on home heating oil and unable to pay the 80% spike in prices. Your government seems to think that you don't have to help because we are now in March, but people must still heat their homes in spring, and there are vulnerable people all over the country who cannot now afford to turn their heating on. Elderly people sitting in freezing cold homes whose pensions just won't stretch far enough. Disabled people whose incomes have already been cut by €1,400 by your budget, making choices between eating and heating, and families who are at breaking point who don't know how they'll be able to keep the lights on. Taoiseach, the Social Democrats have repeatedly asked the government to introduce a targeted €400 energy credit, which will be paid to 800,000 households who are struggling the most. And you've said again that we need targeted, affordable measures. This is a targeted, affordable measure. This would help hundreds of thousands of low-paid workers who do not receive the fuel allowance, and would provide a much greater level of support for pensioners, carers and disabled people. Wouldn't go far enough to cover the spiralling prices we've seen, but it would be a big help and represent meaningful support. Your government hasn't even bothered examining this proposal, so you're already in here today announcing half measures instead of the comprehensive package that should be introduced. Taoiseach, every time we listen to lectures from you and your ministers on the importance of targeting supports for those who need them most, but there's a huge gap between what you say and what you do. Your budget reduced the incomes of the poorest households by more than 4%, and massively increased poverty rates for elderly people from 13% to 19%. That's not me saying that, Taoiseach, that's the Parliamentary Budget Office. And now you come in here today when people desperately need real support, and all you have to offer them is a measure that excludes hundreds of thousands of households who are drowning in skyrocketing bills. So, Taoiseach, why are there no targeted supports for low-paid workers, and will you examine the Social Democrats' proposal for a targeted energy credit of €400?
Thank you, Deputy.
First of all, Deputy, I appreciate you raising these issues in a constructive light, but I am taken by, and it's not just you who have made this comment, that the government has waited for weeks and weeks. We're in a war for 3 weeks. We need some perspective here. Government doesn't have billions and billions to allocate on a monthly basis. which is the implication one could draw from all of the protestations from the opposition today. So we do need a bit of reality, a bit of flexibility in terms of the fiscal situation and in terms of thinking out to the end of the year and making sure we have enough in reserve to cushion and to make sure we can support people if things even get worse. And that is a consideration. We also have to protect services. There are increasing costs in education, in health and in other services. And I'm very anxious that we have enough in reserve to protect those also. So the easiest thing for us to do would be to announce a €2 billion package today. People are saying, that's great. This is only March. So I would say to people that we do have to be relatively cautious and responsible as well, acknowledging that people out there are under a lot of pressure. No question about that, because of the impact of the war on the energy markets and because of the nature and unprecedented nature of the supply shock. That hasn't yet filtered through, by the way. Hasn't yet filtered through globally or indeed to our economy. And in the budget, we did put in, and I would disagree with your assessment on the budget. I mean, what we did for child support payments was the most significant, record increases, €8 per week for children under 12 and 16 for children over 12. And we've, as part of the child poverty unit in my own department, with Minister Callery, we focused very much on that child poverty package, which is permanent. And today in Cabinet, Dash Plus was approved. So we've taken a series of measures, Deputy, that have really worked on the child poverty issue and that will bear dividend in the coming years. Of that I've no doubt, because of our focus on those key areas. On the working family payment cohort of people who up to the last budget were excluded from the fuel allowance have now been included. That's an extra 50,000 working families. And that means about 470,000 families overall, or people, are now benefiting from the fuel allowance. And the extension, I think, will be welcomed by all of those families as a targeted measure. It's an instrument we have, a mechanism we have within the Social Protection Party to enable us to pay people and to give them additional allowances to help them to try and cope with the very large increases that have occurred over the last number of weeks, and that will take it out to the end of April, in addition then to the reduction in excise.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
On diesel.
Deputy O'Callaghan to respond.
Taoiseach, you can disagree with my assessment of the budget all you like, but I was quoting the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is independent. Are you saying you don't accept their independent analysis of your budget? The proposal we've put forward, Taoiseach, is fully costed. It's €362 million. It is targeted and affordable, as you say, measures need to be. That would leave plenty of room for further measures later in the year, if and when and as they are required. So why are you not adopting our proposal? In terms of low-paid workers who do not receive the fuel allowance, you are doing nothing extra for them at all. Do you not see the difficulty therein? If you're on low pay and you don't qualify for fuel allowance, if your home heating oil bill has gone up to fill the tank has gone up by 80%, what are you meant to do, Taoiseach? Are they invisible to you? Why are there no measures for them? Why, in terms of people who are have disabilities, carers, pensioners, why do you think the increases of just a few weeks' extension of fuel allowance is sufficient? It doesn't make a dent. There were already a huge amount of arrears before this crisis began. You already had 320,000 households in arrears. So why aren't you taking the targeted measures you need to support them?
Taoiseach to respond.
Yeah, could I just first of all say to the Deputy that the working family payment was generally designed with low-income workers in mind, and that they're now included in the fuel allowance, which I think is a very significant targeted measure by the government, and the correct one. And it's a framework that exists already. This package is about 250 million. So I'm not sure what you're saying you'd take out, and I'm not clear on your costings, and I'd need to get it costed properly by social protection and by others in respect of that. But we have an alternative suite of measures that costs about 250. In the United Kingdom, it's 53 million. 53. And I'd say go around the European capitals, you will not see a packet as big as this one, Deputy. And as I said to you earlier, we have to think ahead. in terms of potentially other challenges that will come our way in respect of this crisis. It's now only March. It's now only March. And I think we do need to be cautious, notwithstanding the pressures that are on people, and that will manifest themselves in other parts of the economy as well. If this continues.
Deputy Michael Collins.
Thank you. Taoiseach, Ireland has walked blindfolded into an energy crisis, not by accident, not by misfortune, but because consecutive governments choose to leave our country exposed and dependent on others for the most basic lifeline we have, energy. The price of those choices is now hammering every single household and every single business in this country. In 2022, in leaders' questions to you, Taoiseach, about the Barry Rowe oil field, I demanded that Ireland build real energy independence. Later that year, I spoke of a floating gas terminal off Cork Harbour, and I warned that relying on imports was reckless and dangerous, and the government laughed off my warnings, saying it's fine. Well, it's not fine, and the people of Ireland are paying dearly for that government arrogance. Fuel prices have jumped again and again in recent weeks. Hauliers are warning they cannot keep the wheels turning. Farmers, tradesmen, fishermen, home health carers, school bus drivers, already squeezed middle families and elderly, 1.5 million of them are being squeezed until they break. And what does the government do? It tells people to wait. Last week we were told by government there will be no knee-jerk reaction, to be patient. Even yesterday a coalition source said the government can shield people, and while you can shield people from everything, your complete green agenda in the last government is coming home to roost. To make sure to never prepare our country for the future, but tax the living daylights out of every citizen in this country with a 65% fuel taxes like VAT, NORA and carbon, making the motorists of this country a cash cow for the government like no other country in the world. This is a total failure of planning, leadership and responsibility by this and other governments. A country that imports nearly all of its energy, taxes fuel at 60 to 65% and blocks practical solutions for security is not transitioning, Taoiseach, it is stumbling. While Irish families struggle, other countries are securing their future. Europe and the world is planning. Ireland is panicking and being called the laggards of Europe. In 2022 I spoke to you about the Barry Rowe oil field because it represented something bigger, not just an oil field, but a political system that refuses even to access its own resources while continuing to rely on foreign fuel, its complete neglect by government. And beyond Barry Rowe, Ireland still has no clear, credible path to energy independence. Imagine, after a Green Party in government, solar systems that cost up to 20,000 to run a home only gets a measly 1,800 grand. This is not transition, it's a slow-motion collapse, and the government is participating in what's happening. People are paying more because of the choices made at the cabinet table, choices based on ideology instead of practicality, choices that have left Ireland more vulnerable, not less. We didn't just leave ourselves open, we left ourselves defenceless. Today's announcements help with those on fuel loans. That must be welcome, but the squeezed middle get 20 cents a litre off diesel, the same amount that went up last week. A 2 cent a litre for the farmer and the fisherman leaves a country in a very angry state and leaves both those sectors furious. Ireland needs an immediate urgent national plan for energy independence, not in 2050. Taoiseach, can you outline this plan to me today?
Taoiseach to respond.
First of all, we do have an energy plan. At the European Council meeting last week, Deputy, it was very interesting presentation by President von der Leyen, going back over from the late 1970s through every decade to the present day. And the one constant was that any energy crisis was a fossil fuel crisis, generated through war and conflict, the most recent being the Russian invasion of Ukraine before this war. And so actually what you're advocating in terms of you've attacked the agenda for wind energy, for solar and so on like that, you're actually creating a scenario where there would be more energy dependence into the future and an energy dependence on fossil fuels, which would be, I think, a disaster for the country, quite frankly. Because if this teaches us anything, it's the necessity to double down on our focus and investment in renewables. And there are hard choices to make in relation to this. I was in the Dáil recently when a deputy in one contribution complained about a gas station, a gas generation station, a wind farm and a solar farm in the one location. And I asked the question, how are we going to turn the lights? So we do need a societal discussion about this, because the bottom line is we're importing a lot of fossil fuel, which is subject to volatility in the markets and to various crises that can actually occur. And the Barry Rowe oil field has been a long time, long before 2022, being sort of handled or dealt with within the private sector, of course, and it never really bore fruit, even prior to any decisions that we took, both as a government or as an Oireachtas, in terms of any new fossil fuel developments. But actually the plan, the recently 2025 Energy in Ireland report shows that about 41.3% of our electricity demand in 2024 was being generated by renewable sources. That's very, very good progress. We've made a lot of progress in the last decade or so and beyond. We have a target of 80% of electricity demand to be met by renewables in the near term and to go to net zero out to 2050. So we are actually a renewable success story, Deputy, and that is the trajectory of travel. We receive more of our electricity from onshore wind farms than anyone else in Europe, and we're among one of the global leaders in integrating variable renewables onto the electricity grid. And I think that's something that runs contrary to the narrative that you were presenting there. And in terms of the carbon tax, 173 million of that went to farmers through the Acres programme. Or in 2026, 173 million is going to the Department of Agriculture for farmers. In terms of, we have 55,000 farmers in the Acres scheme. That improves best outcomes on climate, air, water quality, biodiversity, green agricultural pilots and so on like that. You'd be the very first deputy coming in if any farmer in West Cork had reduced funding as a result of the carbon tax being removed, and you'd be singing a different tune.
Deputy Collins,
if that turned out to be the case.
Thank you very much, and I will be singing a different tune because the farmers of West Cork are disappointed this morning that they're only going to get 2 cents off the green diesel, and that's the facts. And the facts are you all made these promises to me in 2022 about renewable energies, haven't delivered. That's the bottom line here. Taoiseach, Ireland's energy security is hanging by a thread. We cannot keep relying on imported diesel in global markets we have no control over. Your promise in 2022 was more offshore wind farms, but the only one we have is sought a decommissioning licence. So Taoiseach, when will the first of these offshore wind generating plants be developed in Ireland? Also, I'm bringing forward a proposal for Ireland's first zero-emission freight corridor pilot scheme from Cork Port to West Cork, not alone as a climate gesture, but as a real energy security solution. And we have the experts to do this. Electricity heavy-duty trucks supported by a battery swapping and hybrid charging depot in filling stations would slash our dependence on foreign fuel. Every diesel truck on this route today burns fuel Ireland doesn't produce and cannot guarantee. Battery swapping turns trucks around in about 5 minutes, powered by local renewable energy, keeping supply chains stable even when a global fuel markets go wild. And this protects family-run hauliers by giving them a secure, affordable energy source. This is not experimental. This system is already fully operational in New Zealand, Hong Kong and Japan, and it works. This deserves full support, government. Will we get it?
Taoiseach.
But again, Deputy, on the offshore wind, we held the onshore Res 5, the offshore town Nua auctions, which have delivered wind energy projects at competitive prices for consumers. The Department expects the 5 projects which bid into the offshore 1 auction to be in construction by 2030, marking a new phase in electricity generation in Ireland. And the second offshore auction was the first to be held under the new spatial plan for offshore renewable energy development, the South Coast Designated Maritime Area Plan, and so forth. So we are making progress. It is challenging. I've established a clearinghouse within my department involving industry, regulators and government departments to drive this forward and to accelerate it as quickly as we can. Because I do think it's vital for the future of the country's economy in terms of that particular agenda. In terms of the specifics, by the way, I never laugh at anything you propose or suggest. Okay, but that, you have a good old turn of phrase where you say you were laughed out the window or you were laughed out something and it was 3 or 4 years ago. The point is that we've had a very poor record, actually, historically, on fossil fuel discovery in this country.
Thank you.
With Kinsale, with Corrib, that's about it. Independence in terms of energy in this country will be grounded on renewables,
and
wind and solar and battery storage.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Just before I call on the Chief Whip, I'd like to welcome all the people in the gallery this afternoon. Hope you're enjoying our robust debates, and especially to the St Anne's National School from Rathangan and their teacher, Miss Ita Cunningham. Now, I call on the Chief Whip under Standing Order 35 to move the arrangements for this week's business. Chief Whip. Is that agreed? Not agreed. Deputy Doherty.
This is outrageous, the agenda that has been presented here. The government expect us to debate what is the major burning issue. You may think it's not an issue, but for 4 weeks people have been pushed to the pin of their collar. Diesel gone up by 55 cents while you have delayed and dithered. And now when they bring forward a motion which is a half-baked idea, doesn't even go far enough, they say that it has to be dealt with within 60 minutes. But crucially, Cancorlia, and this is the key issue, is they are afraid of the amendment that we're going to place here tonight. You will not even allow that to be voted as according to the agenda here tonight. So I say to you, what are you afraid of? We're going to place an amendment that will remove excise from home eating oil, reduce tax on diesel and petrol, and let's have the vote on it. This is a disgrace.
Deputy
what you're
Smith,
doing.
30 seconds.
Register utter dissatisfaction with how business has been operated. 8 minutes before we were due to sit today, we get a new agenda, and only an hour to discuss the financial resolutions, of which is the only thing people are talking about over the last couple of weeks. It's utterly unsatisfactory, and we register huge objections.
Deputy Jane Commons.
The cost of living in this country, as discussed today, is skyrocketing, and there, before the war in Iran, there was 320,000 households in electricity arrears. People are choosing between heating and eating. The cost of living is impacting more than just energy, though, because there is now the price for education. There are exam fees now being reintroduced that were not put in place since before the pandemic, and this is without warning to parents. This cost of living needs to be discussed this evening.
Taoiseach, it is clear that Donald Trump and the Israeli regime are criminal warmongers that could do anything. And there's some reports suggesting they're already doing this, having said they wouldn't, if they start to bomb more energy infrastructure in Iran, the miserable concessions you've made to address the cost of living spikes could be wiped away overnight. We need serious time to discuss how you're going to actually protect people in this country from the cost of energy spikes resulting from Trump's war.
Thank you, and like the same as my other colleagues here, 60 minutes is not enough time to speak about the crisis that this country is going through at the moment. We need a proper debate in here, and I call for that proper debate. There's farmers, there's hard-squeezed middle, there's fishermen, there's people under serious crisis, and people can't put their heating into the home heating tank this evening. They expected a proper break. They didn't get it here, and we need a proper debate on that here this evening.
Chief Whip to respond, please.
To offer some clarity to what will be transpiring later on today. There will be a motion, financial resolution number 1, this afternoon from the Department of Finance. 60 minutes has been allowed, and we are votable immediately afterwards. So I expect there will be several votes at that time. Just to be clear, in relation to tomorrow's order of business, there has been a change. The National Oil Reserve Agency Amendment Bill 2026, which will be allowed 204 minutes and 10 minutes wrap, which will be instead of the statements in relation to sports. So there will be plenty of time for debate there tomorrow. And Ceann Comhairle, can I also just put on the record to yourself that there is every possibility that I will be returning with a second updated order of business this afternoon in relation to the second financial resolution. So the order of business stands. People want to know exactly what's happening.
Excuse me, are the arrangements agreed? What's the point of order?
The point of order is clarification in relation to the
point of order is where a standing order hasn't been complied with. Resume your seat. There is no point of order. Thank you, Deputy. We'll vote on the order of business. Is the order of business agreed to? There's not a point
in terms of clarity on what we're asking people to vote for, because what is before us is saying that all amendments will be disposed upon and the only vote will be on the government's proposal. The Chief Whip of the government has just stated that there will be numerous votes after the 60 minutes debate. So please provide clarity. If you're accepting that there will be numerous votes on the amendments, I accept that.
Whip, thank you, Deputy. The Chief Whip, if you wish to respond, if not, we move to the order of business stands. The order of business stands.
So what is it? Which one is it? Which one is it?
For this week's business,
so you're getting rid of
Agreed. Deputies in favour say a tall. Deputies in favour say a tall. Deputies against say neither. The order of business is carried. Vote all. Thank you, Deputies. 10 minutes. your seats, please. The proposal on the order of business. The question is that the proposed arrangements for this week's business be agreed to, and on that question, a division has been challenged. Deputies Taw, Mary Butler, Emer Curry, Deputies Neil Porrig McLaughlin and Duncan Smith. Thank you. Excuse me. Result, Deputies Taw 85, Deputies Neil 63. Sheila Mgoilan Kesh. And we now will move to questions on policy or legislation. We'll now resume questions on policy or legislation. To begin, Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald. Deputy MacDonald.
Violence against women and girls is the shame of our society, and we must do everything possible to end it. Taoiseach, these were the words of Natalie McNally's heartbroken brother Declan yesterday after Stephen McCullough was sentenced to life in prison for horrific murder. A sharp reminder of the danger women face. Today, violence against women and girls is at epidemic levels across Ireland. The first government strategy was delivered 15 years ago this month. Progress is far too slow. A judicial system that doesn't work for victims, court cases taking too long, support services underfunded and overstretched, and despite Jenny's Law receiving Cabinet approval last October, we still don't have a register of domestic abusers to protect women from repeat offenders. Taoiseach, when will we see a step change from government to deliver change and bring the determination required to eliminate violence against women and girls?
Taoiseach.
It is a tremendous stain on our society, the level of domestic violence and gender-based violence. And there has been a step change in government responses over the last number of years. Funding is now about 80 million under the last budget. The establishment of CUAN has been an important step change in terms of a dedicated focused provision of services, and the representation of the zero tolerance strategy. So 12 million increase year on year, so the financial resources have been significantly step changed in respect of this issue, and the acceleration of additional refuge spaces and safe accommodation is an important aspect of that. And again, the target is to provide about 282 safe spaces by the end of 2026.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And there's a whole range of other
measures as well
that we've
Taoiseach.
outlined.
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Less than 4 weeks into the government's new rental regime and we're already seeing the effects. Your government is now presiding over the highest level of evictions since the famine. Last week, RTB data showed that the number of eviction notices issued rose by 41% in Q4 of 2025. In total, just over 20,000 people received a dreaded notice of termination through their letterboxes last year, as landlords were already leaving the market in anticipation of your new reckless rent rules. And now we're seeing mass evictions at a higher scale again. 14 families in an apartment complex in Ballybane in Galway City, 20 families on Lord Edward Street in Limerick, and in my own constituency too, Taoiseach, I'm hearing it. Renters are vulnerable, they need protection. The Labour Party have offered constructive solutions, so I'm asking again, will you institute a ban on no-fault evictions now to protect families and children in particular from homelessness?
You seem very confused in your presentations on the rental market, because on the one level you're complaining about evictions caused by the you're suggesting are caused by the recent reforms in the rental market, which were all about protecting tenants and the 6-year term. So which is it? If you had if you banned evictions, you actually would have a greater churn and a greater loss of landlords. But actually, the facts don't bear out what you said. The latest RTB data shows continued growth in Q4 of last year, with 243,598 tenancies, the highest on record in terms of the number of tenancies at the moment. There were 104,687 private landlords, broadly unchanged year on year. Churn is normal, but overall numbers are stable and actually rising. And 17,342 new tenancies were registered in Q4 of 2025. And the Residential Tenancy Act of 2006 ends no-fault evictions essentially for larger landlords, stronger restrictions on tenancy termination, and rent increases.
Deputy Whitmore's on her feet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corla. Taoiseach, when global energy crisis hit, there is one certainty in Ireland, and that is that energy prices shoot sky high like a rocket and then take years to drop. We saw it when Russia invaded Ukraine. In fact, we still have people who are suffering the consequences of that. 320,000 people still are in arrears on their electricity. We are still facing sky-high electricity prices, despite the CSO reporting yesterday that wholesale electricity prices are down by 72% since the peak. People in Ireland have not seen a 72% reduction in their electricity prices, let me tell you, and people know that well. But we're also seeing it in relation to this war in Iran. We saw a near immediate increase of prices at the pump, and we welcome the excise reductions that you're bringing in, but how are you going to make sure that there is pass-through, that people see a reduction in their petrol and diesel prices from when you bring these measures in, and that there is absolutely no opportunity to price gouge people in this instance? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think ultimately the Competition and Consumer Authority is there to ensure fair play in the marketplace, and certainly government will be keeping a very watchful eye on this, because of course if there is not passed through, that has implications for any potential future measures that government would take in the energy market itself. But we will be keeping a weather-in outlook and eye on this in the coming days, because I do take your point. They went up very quickly. They need to come down now on once the excise duties.
Deputy Ruth Carpenter.
Taoiseach, there was a task force set up into special education in Dublin 15 in October 2024, and 8 months after the final report was handed to the Minister, it has been buried and still not published. Why? So Dublin 15 is a fast-growing area with an acute crisis in school provision for people with additional needs. On this task force, 3 parents gave up their time voluntarily, all who have children with additional needs, and they pushed for the strongest possible recommendations that often got diluted in the drafting. Among the recommendations was forward planning, a central database, good communication, a disability support hub and, quote, substantial additional capital funding for appropriate places. They also asked for action on the teacher supply crisis. Why is this being buried? What are you afraid of by publishing this report and actually being held to account? Or was it just done for the general election to take this issue off the agenda in Dublin 15? We need an additional special school in Dublin 15 and one more CDNT area as well.
I'll check with the Minister for Special Education in respect of that report and timelines for its publication, but there is forward planning now. I mean, we've brought forward the date by which parents and schools apply for places in our schools, and that has happened this year. You must be aware of that. There is the establishment of a central database that has to happen, but it's not there yet, I'd acknowledge that. There has been substantial capital increases in education, and particularly in special education. It takes up a huge portion of the education capital budget, and that will continue this year in terms of the provision for special education. Special education is growing exponentially in terms of resources, be it special needs assistants, be it teachers, be it buildings. That is the story of where we are in terms of special education, and that will continue to be the case.
Deputy Paul Gogarty.
Taoiseach, you may have seen the latest figures from the Health Products Regulatory Authority, which are a cause for concern. Last year, for example, more than 750,000 units of illegal or indeed fake medicines were seized, and a number of individual packages separately purchased by members of the public rose by a whopping 180%. For example, we had a 30-fold surge in fake GLP-1 weight loss products, and also a sharp rise in pregabalin seizures, which is a drug with legitimate applications such as epilepsy, but which can kill when misused. Now, to its credit, the HPRA has shut down thousands of online listings, but the problem is still escalating. So my question, Taoiseach, is, with this serious and growing public health threat, what additional measures and resourcing is the government going to take to curb the online sale of dangerous medicines, protect vulnerable people, and also ensure safe and affordable access to legitimate treatments?
Deputy Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising what is a very important issue. I will talk to the Ministers in Health and Enterprise and others who would have an impact on this, because it's a very serious issue, because fake drugs can do real harm to people and damage health. And it's an area that perhaps needs maybe a higher profile focus. And I certainly take away the fact that you've raised the issue and you've highlighted it, and I'll come back to you with the views of both the authority and others.
Deputy Andreas Moynihan.
Taoiseach, last night the EU and Australia came to a trade agreement, and as a small open economy, trade is hugely important to us in Ireland. The agreement, it looks to be fairly opportune, good opportunity for Ireland.
But I just want to draw your attention to farmers' needs, and that they're under pressure with milk prices, fertiliser prices, diesel, and the idea of increasing competition at this time is much more challenging for them. What assurances are there for farmers that they will be able to compete on a level playing field, that there will be similar standards in this trade agreement, and that milk and beef farmers will be able to compete on a level playing field in this trade agreement?
Taoiseach, please.
First of all, the Government has welcomed the agreement. We'll be supporting the agreement at EU level. Ireland's agri-food exports will benefit under the deal through easier access to the large Australian market. We believe this will give us more opportunities to sell our products due to tariff elimination. Tariffs will go down to zero on key EU export products such as cheese over 3 years. There will be recognition for iconic Irish geographical indications such as Irish whiskey, Irish cream and poachine. There will be preferential rules, as I say, of origin for Irish whiskey. Prepared foodstuffs, Irish dairy exporters, including cheesemakers, will also see tariff reductions. European Union dairy exports to Australia are estimated to have the potential to grow by 48% under the deal. Yes, there are issues then in terms of importation of beef. That will be over a 10-year period. But there are mechanisms that have been put in place in terms of any unacceptable impact on markets where the EU can intervene. The figure is much less than what the Australian side was seeking, and it will be phased in over a 10-year period. It represents about 0.5%
Time is up on that, Taoiseach. Further correspondence, Deputy James
domestic consumption of beef.
Taoiseach, on Friday I met with Denise in Tiernan's nursery in Rathmines, a childcare provider. She's been Denise in Tiernan's nursery in Rathmines. She's been operating it for over 35 years, and unfortunately she's had to take the decision that she has to exit core funding to make ends meet, and she's had to notify that to parents. And this is not a person who's looking to make loads of money. She's just trying to continue to provide the service she was already providing. And to be honest, since I've been elected to TD, I've met lots of childcare providers in my constituency that have had to make this difficult decision of exiting core funding. They don't want to tell their parents that they're going to have to increase their fees, and obviously we as a government, we're trying to reduce the cost of childcare for parents. And my question really is the level of engagement that the department can have with providers who do exit. I know globally the figures are relatively small when you ask parliamentary questions on this, but we do want to get them back into the system. We don't want people exiting core funding because we can't control the fees if they do exit. And some of this is bureaucracy, the various funding schemes that they have to operate from. Are there more things that we could be doing in respect of providers who do exit core funding, so that we can keep the costs down for parents and support providers at the same time?
I mean, first of all, I think I don't have the background to the specific case, but core funding now exceeds about €436 million. That's up 62% since 2022, with 93% or 4,590 of providers signed up, and that keeps fees at 2021 levels. But we constantly, I'll speak to the Minister in relation to this, it's a matter that's kept under constant review. We don't want to lose anybody, as you say, from the core funding framework. But maybe people feel they can do better outside of it, I don't know. But it's not great for parents in terms of costs when that happens. So I will talk to the Minister in terms of you raising this, and we keep it under constant review to make sure it's accessible and that it makes sense for people to be participants in the core funding programme. But the numbers are fairly impressive in terms of the increase over the last 4 years, in particular in terms of numbers.
Deputy Joanna Byrne.
Taoiseach, I would like government to urgently address a serious situation facing a local primary school in my constituency that has the potential to impact hundreds of children and families. Despite providing the first breakfast club of its kind in the state, St Paul's National School are hugely concerned that because they don't fit the new model for school meals, they are at risk of losing this vital service. Their funding is literally in limbo. They have sought clarity from the department to no avail. I have raised this privately with Minister Cleary and haven't received a response yet. This school is at the heart of a proud community in Drogheda that has felt the brunt of organised crime feuds, and their breakfast clubs, school meals and canteen are a lifeline to many. In 2016, government clearly agreed with this when their new bill rightly ensured that the fully fitted kitchens and dining spaces were included in the plans. Their very model, which was lauded as best practice model for school meals at the time by Fianna Fáil ministers, must now be facilitated within the new hot school meal programme. The funding must be provided without delay, and the school, more importantly, needs to be given clarity. Taoiseach, will you seek for the minister to at least visit this school and see their model at work first hand and allay the concerns of the principal and the wider community?
Taoiseach, please.
But again, I don't have the full background to the case here. Obviously, we have funded the building very well as a government. And the Hot School Meals programme has been rolled out very, very quickly and effectively in many fronts. There's lots of debate around nutrition and then we do it better. But fundamentally, it's over the last 3 years it has been rolled out at considerable pace across the length and breadth of the country. I'll talk to the Minister Cleary in respect of the issue that you've raised, whether it's open to have flexibility in terms of how the allocation that every school gets is spent. That's a matter, I think, the Departments of Education and Social Protection with schools can reflect that. And I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Aaron McGreehan.
Taoiseach, I acknowledge the temporary measures that have been introduced to help address the rise in fuel and energy costs. They will offer some short-term support at a time when many households, as we all know, and businesses are feeling real pain. I spoke with many loud hauliers, coach operators and households who are desperately worried about what's to come. This conflict in the Middle East is the latest in supply chain shock for our energy markets. The uncertainty around supply chains are creating real fears about what lies ahead. In Louth, like right across the country, families are already finding it difficult to manage heating and everyday living costs. Small businesses are affected. Coach operators and hauliers along the M1 corridor continuing to face the fluctuating fuel costs. We need a real plan to start reducing costs of our energy in this country. It is, and you know this, Taoiseach, it is unsustainable. Given these global pressures and local challenges, can you outline how the government will intend to keep the situation under close review, ensure the supports can be adjusted if it worsens, and also can we start front-loading investment into alternative energy sources, advancing our critical infrastructure plan and extending our retrofit programmes to really future-proof these problems?
I thank the Deputy for raising this issue. Certainly in terms of hauliers and coaches, I think the haulage industry is a very key industry which has been underestimated in terms of its role in our modern economy in getting goods from ports to shelves and from manufacturing facilities to the ships to our export markets. And I'm very interested in making sure that we have a sustainable haulage industry into the future, and Minister Dáil Debate has engaged with the industry over the last number of weeks, and today's measures reflect a part of that engagement in terms of some ease of the pressure, although acknowledging that the pressures are still very, very significant on the industry. And more generally, you are correct in terms of driving forward with the retrofitting programme and energy efficiency programmes, in terms of solar, in terms of insulation, and in terms of front-loading that. We'll do everything we can to support businesses and households in terms of any energy efficiency measures that they can take that could help in the short term.
Thank you. Deputy Catherine Kelly.
Taoiseach, I would like to raise the matter of the state of our local roads in my constituency of Carlow and Kilkenny. While the recent spell of heavy, persistent rain has ceased for the moment, thankfully, the damage done to our roads in the flash floodings of January this year, particularly in rural Carlow and Kilkenny, is still very evident and causing grave disruption and inconvenience, disproportionately affecting rural dwellers. Now, I must commend Carlow and Kilkenny County Council, who have worked hard at making our local roads passable, but they're a long way from being sufficiently repaired. The reason for that is not the lack of will of both local authorities, but it's the delay in the receipt of the emergency funding that was promised from government. Following on from the surveys done, it's estimated that Carlow County Council need approximately €4 million, while Kilkenny County Council need an estimated €5 million to return those severely damaged roads back to pre-flood conditions. So my question today, Taoiseach, please, is where is the promised funding for our local authorities, and when will it be released to Carlow and Kilkenny County Council?
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Yeah, the Minister has sought submissions from the county councils across the length and breadth of the country in respect of damage done from the recent storms and flooding that occurred. And the Minister is assessing those submissions now with a view to allocations to try and help the county councils concerned.
Deputy Donna McGehattigan.
Taoiseach, I recently sent you a parliamentary question which you declined to answer, and the question was to yourself and the question was around the decision-making process behind the recent announcement of a 200-bed hospital unit in Raheen, Limerick, which is option B, part of the Exchequer recommendations. And people in Clare are asking, when were you in the Cabinet made aware of this? As it seems some of your own TDs and senators in the local area were not aware of this announcement being made. People in Clare were told to stop suggesting sites by one of your government ministers. Did this mean that it was a done deal? And how did the procurement process come about? Did the government approach the landowner or vice versa? Taoiseach, the plan will not solve the problem in Clare that your government caused in 2009. And what people in Clare are asking, was this a Fianna Gael announcement or a government announcement? Because if you look at this announcement on reeling in the years down the line, you'll see that it's all Fianna Gael elected reps at this. And Taoiseach, do you believe that this will solve the issues for those in Clare, particularly those out west and North Clare, well outside the golden hour?
Taoiseach to respond.
Well, I didn't decline to answer any question. I think it's wrong of you to suggest that I did. You know full well, in terms of hospital sites, those questions go to the Minister for Health.
Deputy.
Sorry, no, I don't. I'm not responsible for every individual minister's decision making. It's a well-known practice in the Dáil and the Oireachtas. Questions go to the Minister who is accountable to the House in respect of those matters. But of course, I was aware of the decision, and the Minister would have informed me very early on, along with the Taoiseach and Minister Sean Kenny and other ministers, in terms of what overall is a positive decision, given the congestion in UHL. And now there's a pathway forward in terms of health facilities in Limerick and indeed in the Midwest, to be complemented obviously by further services for Ennis and Nina. And so it's a positive development overall. I don't know whether you're obviously against it, but I mean...
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you, Taoiseach. Next speaker is Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett. Time is up, Taoiseach. Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett.
Taoiseach, over the last week I had parents of children with intellectual disabilities from the Before We Die campaign in with me. And they were pointing out that there are now about 2,000 adults with intellectual disabilities who are living with their parents who are over 70, and about 500 of those people are living with parents over 80. So their parents are extremely worried about what's going to happen to their children when they pass away, and are asking, where is the plan? And they're saying there should be a plan, there should be a framework. The number of houses being delivered with supported housing they need is pathetic. They give me a figure of 1 transition for 2026 so far. 1. With thousands of people needing it. So the question is, will you respond to the Before We Die campaign's call for a plan, for a framework and for urgent action to provide the transitions necessary for children with intellectual disabilities?
I am responding to the issue. I've met with the Before We Die group some weeks ago. I placed it on the agenda of the next Cabinet Subcommittee on Disability. I spoke to the Minister of Housing, Minister for Disability, Minister for Health. But what is needed here is a concerted collective approach. I acknowledge that the current situation isn't sustainable or satisfactory and creates undue pressure on parents, particularly parents of citizens and people with, who are senior of age and who need independence. And the idea that some of the Section 39s would just say go and apply to the local authority and it's up to yourself is not on, really. And I've made that very clear to the system. Bottom line is, I think you need people joined up together. You need to have supports if someone gets housing. And there's varying continuum of need. So some will need less support, some will need substantial support and so forth.
Deputy.
And that's, so I will, it's an issue I'm seized of. It's a very serious issue for the families concerned.
Deputy Duncan Smith.
Generally.
Taoiseach, you, like me, like probably many people in this chamber, probably learned to swim in a local authority or community pool. Fingal actually has no local authority pool. The closest we have to it is the not-for-profit pool provided by the Portmarnock Sports and Leisure Centre. Now, due to extensive works needed for that pool roof, the pool is closed for the indefinite future. This is threatening jobs, the viability of the leisure centre, but it is removing a vital resource, that is the ability to learn to swim, from people in Portmarnock, Malahide, Swords and all over the Fingal area. Taoiseach, Minister Darragh O'Brien's aware of this. We need funding to repair the roof for this pool. There's no local authority funding stream anymore for pools from government, but there needs to be an investment in the repair of the roof. It is the only community pool that's available in Fingal, and it needs to be repaired at the earliest possible opportunity. Teacher, could ask you to engage with Minister O'Brien and with myself and with the board of the Portmarnock Sports and Leisure Centre to ensure that this can be repaired.
First of all, I don't have the background to it. I learned to swim in the sea, actually, down in West Cork, or maybe Roberts Cove or somewhere like that. But we had a bats long ago. We used to call it the bats, the swimming pool down.
Please.
Down at City Hall, next to City Hall, and the crack was good. I passionately believe in swimming opportunities for young people and children in particular to learn how to swim, as you say, because water safety is essential. It can be a very joyous and healthy discipline for the rest of your life. So I'll talk to Minister O'Brien. He's fairly innovative himself when it comes to projects in Fingal. So I'll see what can be done. I take it by another Minister of Sport is here. But we'll see what can be done in respect of the roof on the swimming pool in Portmarnock.
Deputy Aidan Farrelly.
Taoiseach, a review of income used by Naas General Hospital under the National Treatment Purchase Fund has found that consultants were paid $2 million between 22 and 25. Of this, close to $500,000 was paid to 2 external companies, Taoiseach, in which a director in each company also works as a consultant at Tallaght Hospital. The audit found that consultants were paid significantly higher levels under the fee per patient structure than they would have been through standard contractual or overtime arrangements. And Taoiseach, more importantly, there was no evidence of approval being sought by hospital management for a derogation from standard public procurement procedures. So Taoiseach, really I'm wondering, what are the consequences if and when reviews find such misappropriation of NTPF funds? And secondly, is it time for a national review of the NTPF programme to make sure that this isn't a widespread issue throughout hospitals in the country?
Thank you. Taoiseach, please.
Well, there has been a HSE review of the insourcing the programme, basically, and practice. And there's huge investment since 2025. The Minister undertook a detailed survey of all insourcing activities within the HSE in light of concerns about an over-reliance in the system on supplementary capacity. That report was published by the Minister in July of last year, and that led to a number of measures being taken, stricter control measures to reduce reliance on inappropriate third-party insourcing while maintaining all options for the provision of care to patients. And those controls are now in place to restrict the use of third-party insourcing. We are moving away from our dependency on the model to fully use the internal underutilised capacity we have within our core health service.
Last question, Deputy Roderick O'Gorman.
Taoiseach, yesterday the UK government announced they would make plug-in solar panels available in the near future to British households. And plug-ins are low-cost solar panels that families can put on balconies or outdoor spaces. And retailers and manufacturers, they're working with the UK government to make them available in shops within months. They'd save people money on their bills in the UK, and they could do the same here as well. But when I got a reply to a PQ I put to the Department of Energy in February, they told me they had been considering plug-in solar for 18 months and they still needed more time for consideration. So look, in the middle of an energy crisis, I think the luxury of time has gone past us. So Taoiseach, will you move on this? Will you look to make plug-in solar panels available in Ireland immediately?
Taoiseach.
Well, I'll talk to the Minister in respect of it. I think what you've said sometimes illustrates I won't say the futility of asking parliamentary questions, but you do tend to get standard replies from time to time. That was last February. The Minister's got a huge capital budget. I'm not saying capital is required here. I will talk to the Minister in respect of this. I would be favourably disposed. Anything that can accelerate people getting familiar with the utilisation of renewables and solar, the better. One of the complaints of the existing grant schemes we have is their inaccessibility to people on low incomes, for example. I will talk to the Minister in respect of this.
Questions on policy or legislation. There's a message from the Select Committee before I move to PMB. The Select Committee on Disability Matters has completed its consideration of the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Amendment Bill 2026 and has made no amendments thereto. I now move to Private Members' Bill for Introduction, Planning and Development Material Interest Bill 2026. It's the first stage. I call on Deputy Paul Lawless to move for leave to introduce the bill. Deputy. Deputy, if you could move the bill.
I move the bill.
You have 5 minutes, Deputy.
Firstly, I'm very glad of the opportunity here this afternoon to introduce and move the Planning and Development Interest Bill into the Dáil here on the first stage. This is a very important piece of legislation, and I hope that it will speed up the planning process right across the country. The purpose of the bill and the aim and of the objective is to ensure that people with a genuine and a local stake in a development can participate in the planning process and make observations and objections if they see fit. However, we want to prevent a scenario where individuals or groups that have no connection to a local area who are in some cases acting in bad faith to submit objections to critical infrastructure and housing, etc. And at the moment, it is quite extraordinary that an objection to developments can happen right across this country. So, for example, if a farmer is applying for a slatted shed in Donegal, it is currently the case that objections can be placed from individuals from Kerry and Cork and Dublin and right across the country that have no interest and no awareness and no local material interest in that planning application. And we believe this is wrong, and we want to ensure that the planning process is speeded up, that efficiencies are introduced, and indeed that we prevent the bogus objectors that are happening currently. Under this bill, people will be barred from objecting if they live more than 10 kilometres from the site, or indeed if they own land outside of 5 kilometres. This is actually about supporting local democracy, and it is fundamentally important that local communities and local people have the opportunity to build houses, build sheds, build infrastructure that is fundamentally needed in local areas. The bill does not extend to state agencies or public bodies. However, it is important to state that individuals or groups can still object as long as they're doing so with the support and in conjunction with local individuals in the community. And that is fundamentally important. And it is important because in this country it has been the case where environmental NGOs were submitting planning objections to housing developments and other applications, and they were doing so on the basis to make a quick buck, to hamstrung contractors, to ensure that those developments were delayed, and then it was the case where those individuals were essentially seeking ransom money through consultation fees. Extraordinary what is happening in the state at the moment. We have put a great deal of work into this bill. We have a major problem in relation to vexatious planning objections from people right across the country that have never seen or never set foot in some of these local areas. This bill does balance the right for people to object with the need to prevent abuse in the planning system. And as I mentioned earlier, we have seen scandals in the past where environmental NGOs were objecting to developments and then offered to withdraw those objections if a developer paid them a fee. Absolutely scandalous what was happening. An NGO operating purely for profit with no genuine environmental concerns whatsoever. In one case, two brothers set up an NGO and objected to housing developments at the other end of the country, claiming environmental grounds, and then only to withdraw those objections if the developer paid the so-called consultancy fee. Essentially, they are demanding to be paid off. And situations like this make a mockery of our planning system. Our bill protects the rights of communities to object to developments. It protects the rights of people to lodge objections on behalf of residents within an area as well. And it protects businesses whose interests may be affected. It is fair, it is reasonable, and it is proportionate, and we would urge all members of the House to support this bill.
Is the bill being opposed? Not opposed. Deputy, the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. I'd ask that now you move to you seek to move to the second stage to be taken in private members' time.
I so move.
Thank you, Deputy. Is that agreed? Agreed. The question is carried. And now we have a series of motions that we will get through quickly. A motion read the ministerial rota for parliamentary questions. I call on Minister Hildegard Naughton to move the motion. Is the motion agreed to? Agreed. The motion is carried. Second motion is the motion read the proposed approval of Dáil Éireann on the Data Protection Act 2018 under Section 66 and Section 51(3) Regulations 2026. I now call on the Government Chief Whip, Minister Mary Butler, to move the motion.
I move.
Thank you, Minister. Is the motion agreed to? Agreed. The motion is carried. The third motion is a motion read the report of the Committee on Standing Orders and Dáil Reform entitled Oral Questions to the Taoiseach and Divisions and Weekly Division Time. I now call on the Government Chief Whip, Minister Mary Butler, to move the motion.
I move.
Is that agreed? The motion is agreed. And we now move to Taoiseach's questions. Taoiseach, the first question is to ask the Taoiseach if he will report on his attendance at the most recent meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in support of Ukraine. Questions 1 to 10, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Ceann Corlin. I propose to take questions 1 to 10 together. On the 24th of February, I attended an online meeting of the Coalition of the Willing to mark the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the meeting was co-chaired by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and was joined also by President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, as well as other leaders, some of whom were attending commemoration events in Kyiv. The meeting reaffirmed the Coalition's resolve to continue to support Ukraine until a peace agreement is achieved, including protecting and repairing its energy infrastructure and through increasing pressure on Russia to encourage it to engage in meaningful negotiation through imposing further sanctions and disrupting its shadow fleet. The meeting was an opportunity to take stock of negotiations involving the US, Russia and Ukraine, and President Zelensky offered us Ukraine's perspective on progress. During the meeting, we discussed how the Coalition of the Willing can support these efforts to secure peace and how the Coalition can ensure that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position in those talks. I conveyed Ireland's strong commitment to supporting efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace and security for Ukraine, as I did directly to President Zelensky during his visit to Ireland last December. I also underlined Ireland's consistent position that it is for the people and government of Ukraine to determine their future and to agree to the terms of any peace agreement. I reiterated Ireland's strong support for Ukraine's path towards European Union membership and said that the accession negotiations should be accelerated, emphasising that European Union membership is an important security guarantee for Ukraine and fulfils the objectives of the vast majority of the Ukrainian people. I joined other leaders in strongly condemning the continued attack on civilians and critical energy infrastructure. These attacks have left millions without electricity during the harsh winter months and have forced Ukraine to declare a state of emergency in the energy sector. Over the past 6 months, Ireland has contributed €27 million to provide support for Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure and help alleviate the humanitarian crisis inflicted by Russia's aggression. Ireland continues to consider opportunities to bolster Ukraine's energy security. Work will continue within the coalition to ensure that in the event of a peace agreement, Ukraine has the security guarantees it needs. Such measures would be in accordance with respective legal and constitutional arrangements of participating countries. Ireland's consistent position has been that it is for the government and people of Ukraine to determine their future and to agree to the terms of any peace agreement. It is crucial that it is a just and lasting peace, respecting the principles of the UN Charter. The fundamental principle that borders cannot be changed by force must be upheld. Any agreement must also protect Ukraine and Europe's security. And that means strong, credible guarantees that ensure Ukraine can defend itself going forward to avoid a repetition of the past. Ireland will continue to support these efforts as part of the European Union and through our participation in the Coalition of the Willing.
Thank you. Deputies, 1 minute each. Deputy Rory O'Murco.
Taoiseach, it seems that
As dangerous as we think the world is, it keeps getting worse and worse. Right, we have seen the war in Iran, obviously an absolute illegal action by genocidal Israel, being absolutely backed by America. We hope that the American President, Donald Trump, has bitten off more than he can chew, but we do not know what the future holds. Also, it has also meant a lifting of restrictions in relation to the sale of Russian oil. And I would ask what engagement the Taoiseach has had in relation to others around this. And I would also reiterate what has been said earlier here, that while we want to see, obviously, reductions in relation to diesel and particularly in relation to petrol, but we cannot have a situation where we don't deal sufficiently with the huge cost that people are paying in relation to home heating oil. We have to protect ourselves here, and we also need to eventually play our part in leading to a roadmap to a better world where we don't deal with this madness.
Germugget Ceann Comhairle and Taoiseach, I welcome the fact that Ireland will continue to contribute in whatever way we can to address Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. I do believe that we need to cooperate in a number of specific areas. One I want to instance is cybersecurity, and obviously Ireland, like many other European countries, are regularly on the receipt of cyber attacks emanating particularly from Russia. I know at our Committee on Artificial Intelligence, even today, the Court Service highlighted the fact that Russia is a source of many of the cyber attacks on our Court Service. I do, Taoiseach, also want to know about how we are going to continue to address the problem of the shadow fleet operating in Irish waters in terms of both Russian sanction busting with regard to oil, but also Russian submarines and Russian naval vessels operating. I think it's critical that we operate in partnership with other European nations and to learn from the experiences that they have had.
Thank you, Deputy Naoise O'Carroll.
Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, this morning the Irish Times reported work done by Conor Gallagher and the OCC RP in relation to Aughanish Illumina in Limerick and how product from there is being used in the military industry in Russia. And this afternoon I spoke with the Ukrainian ambassador Larisa Garasko as well, who has expressed her deep fears about this news as well. Can I ask what the government is doing and, to its knowledge, what it can do in relation to this in Aughanish Illumina and to stop the sale of products from Ireland to fund the war in Ukraine?
Deputy Shea Brennan.
Garmagad Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, the Middle East conflict is having wide-ranging repercussions, and two of these impact directly on Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Firstly, Russia was selling oil, Ural oil, at approximately $40 a barrel in the last few months towards the end of last year. This has obviously risen substantially since the outbreak of the conflict in the Middle East, and two reasons are behind this: the rise in global oil prices, firstly, and secondly, as we know, the US sanction waiver that's now allowing India to purchase Russian oil. So it's estimated that Russia takes about 370 billion from oil per day. 370 million from oil per day, and that it's noted that President Zelensky himself said that this rise in oil prices and Russia's ability to now sell to India is worth approximately 10 billion towards the Russian war effort in Ukraine.
Deputy.
So I want to ask, what discussions are you having at EU level in relation to this?
Owen Hayes.
Taoiseach, the full scale of invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation under Vladimir Putin began 4 years and 1 month ago. I remember having Zelensky here in the chamber late last year, and it seemed as if the whole world was upon his shoulders, and it's something I'll never forget. In the context of the recent geopolitical events and spreading of warfare, it is clear that tougher sanctions will be required to counter Putin's warmongering. Combined with the alarming reticence of the Trump and Orban administrations to join the coalition of the willing, there is a substantive question about how the coalition will impose tougher sanctions, steadfastly uphold existing sanctions on oil and gas from Russia in the midst of an energy crisis, and enforce the robust security guarantees sought by Ukraine to end the war. Can you make a commitment here and now that Ireland will not participate in the lifting of sanctions on Russia, including on Russian oil and gas, will pursue tougher sanctions on the Russian Federation, and will do so even in the absence of US support?
Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, you have rightly and repeatedly condemned Putin for a criminal, barbaric, imperialist attack on Ukraine. Will you do the same when it comes to what Trump and the Israeli regime are now doing to Iran and to Lebanon? Bombing the hell out of civilians, infrastructure in Iran, in the case of Israel, now ethnically cleansing South Lebanon, and indeed will you condemn Trump's suggestion that he might, quote, take over Cuba, attack another country in exactly the criminal, entirely unjustified, illegal way that Putin attacked Ukraine? Have you got consistency in your principles? Will you condemn it and call it out when it's done by the United States and the regime in Israel?
Murphy.
Thanks, Karen Corda. Taoiseach, on the 5th of March, Fianna Fáil Minister Robert Troy told the Dáil that, quote, Ireland's position on the use of force where there is no UN mandate or authorisation is well established and known. For fear that anyone has any doubt, let me be clear, it is wrong and it is illegal. So the use of force without UN mandate or authorisation is wrong and it is illegal. Absolutely correct, Minister Troy. But Taoiseach, how can you square that with your support for the coalition of the willing in Ukraine? And how can you square it with continuing to try to abolish the triple lock? The use of force is illegal unless it has a UN mandate. It's absolutely clear. That applies whether it's for peacekeeping or strengthening international security, as it's put in your heads of bill of the Defence Amendment Bill. Is there disagreement in Fianna Fáil over this? You want to abolish the triple lock that enshrines the principle, saying that we will only engage in the use of force when there is a UN mandate, when there's another Fianna Fáil minister correctly saying that to do so is illegal.
Taoiseach, I too want to raise the report by Conor Gallagher in the Irish Times today that was done in conjunction with the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. It is very, very concerning what has been reported, that Russian smelters supplied by the Limerick plant Ognish Alumina are selling vast amounts of aluminium to a trading company that supplies dozens of Russian arms manufacturers. Taoiseach, is your government aware of any links between companies receiving aluminium from Ognish and the weapons industry in Russia? Thank you.
Deputy Louis O'Hara.
Taoiseach, following the invasion of Ukraine, many of the Ukrainian nationals who came to Ireland did not speak English, and to assist them, the state provided significant additional funding for ESOL classes through the ETB network. This year, government has decided to remove this additional funding for ETBs, and as a result, Galway Roscommon ETB have had to inform 25 teachers they are being let go, and roughly 150 classes will be cancelled. And this cut is affecting classes across the board, mainly English language and literacy, but also Irish language classes and other areas as well. And many of the staff affected were only weeks away from receiving permanent contracts, having almost completed their 4 years. And as we speak here, staff and students are protesting these cruel cuts outside GRETB and Athenry. So Taoiseach, I want a commitment from you that you will engage with the Minister in relation to this and advise him to reverse these cuts.
I'm not sure that it is pertinent, the wrong, possibly. Yeah.
It was in the context of Ukrainian people coming here following the outbreak of the war.
We'll leave that then to the Taoiseach. Taoiseach to respond. Sorry, Deputy Rose Conway-Walsh last.
And sorry, my question as well, Taoiseach, is around Ukrainians living here and what we need to do, because it's been brought to my attention that many Ukrainians that are living here are having major difficulties in renewing their Ukrainian passports. Now, those who fled the Russian invasion and sought refuge here now find themselves unable to renew their passports in Ireland. And you'll know that children, when they reach the Ukrainian children, when they reach the age of 14, have to get a passport by themselves, or otherwise they're fined. And the current online process repeatedly times out and kicks them out of the system. Now, other countries such as Spain and Italy and Poland have put in place an in-person DP document appointment-based service, allowing Ukrainians to renew their passports efficiently and without unnecessary stress. But Ukrainians in Ireland have told me that they are now forced to travel to either Poland, Spain or Italy at significant financial cost. Do you know about this, Taoiseach, and can you ensure that it's rectified? Thank you.
10 members, Taoiseach.
Thank you indeed.
Deputy Rory Mark.
Yeah. Again, look, the question is in relation to my attendance at the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, and it's striking that quite a number of members just avoided any reference to my attendance at that meeting, which I think is illustrative and isn't really good enough. If we have specific questions that are tabled, we should really concentrate on those questions during Taoiseach's questions, because we have the order of business or for half an hour, 40 minutes on general issues like ETB or education or health or whatever, and we have the leaders' questions as well for a range of other issues. In terms of the Deputy Omar Coup, I think, was referring to the restrictions on the sale of Russian oil. We were seeking to impose a further round of sanctions last week. Hungary is objecting, and it's really outrageous, the Hungarian position, in terms of both stopping any new round of sanctions, but also the €90 billion package for the Ukraine, which I know your party opposed as well. You're in good company with Viktor Orban in terms of opposing. No, that's not true.
Deputy Conway,
that's a fact. You've opposed the 90 billion.
Please.
No, sorry, no, I just made it through the point. There's a view abroad.
Deputies.
Hungary has a view.
This is
Orban has a view.
Allowed.
Sinn Féin have a view. You're basically saying that Ukraine should surrender, because if they don't get that budgetary package and package to support them to defend themselves, it's surrender. Like, there's no other option for Ukraine but to surrender if you don't get that 90 billion package across. I'm shocked at Sinn Féin's position on it, but it's reflected in your questions. I thought about your Coalition of the Willing was about Ukraine, and all you can offer is one question in terms of that, another on the ETB in that loan, which has nothing at all to do with it. And it just suggests that, as far as you're concerned, Ukraine really doesn't matter, and that's been kind of a position since 2014 from the Sinn Féin
you'll
party.
Have to take it up another four.
Deputy, and on, like, we want more sanctions, and there could be challenges down the line. In terms of if the global crisis continues. Deputy Byrne raised the issue of cybersecurity. It's a huge issue. Many private sector organisations are under fairly regular attack, and a lot is occurring from within Russia. You could have either third country backers, who back certain hackers or certain people who are involved in cyber warfare, or you can have criminal entities, but who are known to the authorities in Russia. So the Kontai group is believed to have caused the attack on our health services during COVID-19. Now, it's inconceivable that they would be allowed operate with the freedom that they do in Russia without some tacit acknowledgement or support from the administration or the government there. But it is, and as you mentioned, there was reference in, I think, the court services, but it is a very significant source of concern to us. So we have to build up. We discussed this with the United Kingdom government the week before last when we met with Keir Starmer and the ministers. It's a big concern for them. We want to cooperate more with them on knowledge and around technology, how best we can resist cyber attacks. And collaboration is the name of the game in terms of countering cyber security attacks, which is learning from the experiences of others who've had them and trying to pool our best brains to counter such attacks into the future. Under the shadow fleet, legislation has been passed which will enable vessels to board or to intercept and put queries to the operators of these ships in terms of their legality and a whole range of other issues. There are a lot of environmental concerns around the shadow fleet. Many of them are walking sort of disasters, not walking, sorry, maritime disasters in terms of potential leakage of oil and so on like that, or collapse, and which would have devastating impacts on the marine environment. But they have been disrupted by a number of EU member states. They've been boarded and so on like that. And the whole idea was to try and disrupt the modus operandi of the shadow fleet, make it less efficient in terms of its service to Russia during these times. Deputy O'Carroll, on Áhanna Shalumna, and I think Deputy Whitmore as well, I think, raised it also. First of all, it is a very significant employer in the Midwest, and it supports hundreds of jobs directly and indirectly, but also it has a connection to the supply chain within Europe in terms of steel and its products. So that's why at European level there has been a general principle: let's not damage ourselves disproportionately, and particularly given an industry that's under attack anyway from broader issues around how the global economy is operating today in terms of some countries giving more protection, subsidies and so on like that. But I am concerned about the report because that was never on the agenda, that there would be, and I think the report is saying that it's supplying to intermediaries who are then supplying it on to Russia in terms of the use for armaments. So that is a concern, and so we will examine that and try and get to the background to it. But it's not just Ireland, it has a relevance to other EU member states in terms of their production also. Deputy Boyd Barrett, in terms of, I made it clear, by the way, in my speech in the White House about Ireland's adherence to the UN nations and to the need for UN mandate and to the international rules in terms of an international rules-based order, and I articulated that strongly, as I did for the need for the war to end and for peaceful resolution. We are dealing with a very repressive regime in Iran, which has for years now been conducting a surrogate war in many respects on an ongoing basis against many, many countries, and particularly in the Middle East. Yes, much more repressive than Saudi, I would argue. Well, I mean, sorry, any regime that executes up to 60, I don't know, we haven't got a precise number, but thousands of their own citizens who went out in the street to protest were mowed down. Now, I'm not defending any other regime or that, but like this is a particularly...
Deputy, it's not a back and forth.
This is a particularly repressive...
Respect for other members.
The contrast with Ukraine is fairly... The contrast with Ukraine is very different. But you'll never acknowledge that.
Deputy,
no, but you yourself and Deputy Murphy and others will never acknowledge that point. President Zelensky was executing nobody before he was invaded. I believe in dialogue. I believe in international rules-based order. I believe in a UN mandate. Although the UN is paralysed. The UN Security Council, why we're doing the triple lock, is because the Security Council is paralysed. It's going to be very hard to get a peacekeeping mission going. But now, because of the Security Council, UNIFIL will end at the end of this year. And the opportunities for Irish peacekeepers, which we've been doing uninterrupted since 1958, is very much in the balance now. But no one seems to care about that on the opposition side in terms of our future role in peacekeeping. And on Cuba, it should be resolved by dialogue. But again, there's another regime that has a certain glorified sort of narrative around it here. But it has been quite a repressive regime as well. And in my view, has oppressed its own people for far too long. It needs to get with it in the modern era. It needs to engage in a sensible dialogue and try and get a resolution. It doesn't need, in my view, any external interventions. I've been to Cuba in the past as a Minister for Foreign Affairs. We were probably one or two or three European ministers at that time in 07-10 period where I visited Cuba hoping that we could get a more liberal view of things. But even then they didn't release political prisoners that we had sought to release off. And I think President Castro and his successor, his brother, ruled with an iron fist, wrongly in my view, and the consequences for its citizens have been fairly dire, and hence many have left and gone off to the United States and elsewhere. So it's not, no one case is simple. There's a complexity and a history to a lot of these issues that defy simplistic sloganeering. And I think I've dealt with the triple lock issue, the UN mandate. Deputy Whitmore, I think I've dealt with that case in terms of, that's our take on it. We will examine it. Deputy O'Hara on DTB. No, not at all. Yeah. That's a matter for the Minister of Education. I think there's plenty of routes to try and source an answer to that. A reference that you raise it, although I don't think it's appropriate to be raising it here in the context of Coalition of the Willing, but I will raise it with the Minister. I know, but this is a different set of questions. Deputy Rosemary Conway Walsh, I will, the Minister, the Department of Foreign Affairs are aware of this issue, and I will come back to you and I'll talk to the Minister. Again, there have been challenges all around, and it's because of the war in Ukraine. There's lots of issues in public services that have come under pressure.
Move on now to questions 11 to 23, inclusive.
I propose to take questions 11 to 23 together. The Department of the Taoiseach Statement of Strategy 2025 to 2028 was approved by Government on the 7th of October 2025 and laid before the Houses of the Oireachtas on the 10th of December 2025. The Statement of Strategy outlines the Department's vision, mission, values, core responsibilities and key activities and policy priorities over the period 2025 to 2028. The Department's mission is to support the Taoiseach and the Government, including implementation of the Programme for Government, through principled leadership and joined-up governance, by coordinating government activity to ensure effective, inclusive and timely decision-making, providing impartial, high-quality policy advice in the national interest, upholding democratic integrity, civil service values and public trust at the centre of government, and promoting a strategic, sustainable, long-term perspective that safeguards Ireland's future prosperity, cohesion and resilience. The core responsibilities and key activities of the Department encompass executive leadership and government coordination, legislative, parliamentary and constitutional duties, policy coherence and whole-of-government perspective, state protocol and commemorations, public communications and information, emergency management and civic engagement, and civil public service leadership and renewal. Supporting implementation of the Programme for Government is at the core of the Department's mission. The policy priorities outlined in the Statement of Strategy, which align with the commitments contained in the Programme for Government, include housing, infrastructure, disability, children and education, economy, trade and competitiveness, climate action, environment and energy, health, justice, migration and social affairs, EU and international affairs, Northern Ireland, national security and water quality. In 2025, the Department provided secretariat for 46 government meetings, which dealt with 1,233 memos to government. It supported me as Taoiseach with 9 meetings of the European Council, 10 meetings of the Coalition of the Willing on Ukraine, and a significant programme of inward and outward visits, including the AI Summit in February, the EU-Africa Summit in Angola in November, and a visit of President Zelensky in December 2025. The strategy sets out how the Department will progress work in all of the above areas, including through the Cabinet Committee structure and its related senior officials groups. The Department's annual reports over the period 25 to 28 provide a mechanism to report progress made on the policy priorities outlined in the Statement of Strategy, and the Statement of Strategy is published Oscailge agus Asperla Chuma.
Deputy Crowe.
Thank you, Last Concorda. Taoiseach, last November I brought you to the University of Limerick, where you visited the Centre for Robotic and Intelligent Systems, better known as CRIS. So the CRIS laboratory is led up by Professor Dan Toll, and when we were there you saw the huge array of cutting-edge technology, cost-effective technology, submersibles, drones, all sorts of equipment. And on the day we were there, from that laboratory in the University of Limerick, they were actually monitoring with an undersea vehicle, a robotically powered vehicle, a wind turbine off the Portuguese coast. There's huge potential here, and I would say that this potential transcends many government departments. There's the potential to monitor shadow fleets, subsea cables, gas lines, offshore wind energy, also to survey ecological and habitat areas, and indeed tackling the trade of illicit drugs, and that's only the start of it. I think this is a very cost-effective way. I think it's strategically important for Ireland. The ask, Taoiseach, and I hope you might be able to accede to this, the ask is that you might convene those various government departments, lead out a group that could look at this. We are currently, unfortunately, the outliers in Europe. We're the only EU country without a national laboratory for robotics. I think this is so important strategically to Ireland Inc., to your departments, to many government departments. And I ask that you might please work with Professor Toll and his group, that you might coordinate a cross-party interdepartmental group to lead this forward. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Deputy Merkel.
Taoiseach, I just want to put this on the record. It was a constituent who sent this to me. I am writing to you to highlight the serious and immediate impact that rising fuel prices are having on community nurses and their ability to provide essential healthcare services. Community nurses depend heavily on travel to reach patients in their homes, often covering large rural areas every day. Unfortunately, the current travel and mileage allowance no longer reflect the true cost of fuel. As prices continue to increase, the reimbursement provided does not cover the actual expenses incurred while carrying out our duties. Ultimately, it may also affect the continuity and quality of care that patients receive in their own homes. I urge you to raise this issue with the Government and to support an urgent review of mileage and travel allowances for community healthcare staff so that they can accurately reflect the real cost of fuel and travel. Community nurses play a critical role in keeping people out of hospital and supporting patients in their homes. It is essential that they are not financially penalised for carrying out their vital work. I would restate what has been said earlier, that an insufficient offering is on the table in relation to the reduction in the cost of fuel. This needs to be addressed, and I get that government can't do everything. I am also saying that there needs to be further action in relation to the cost of home heating oil, because people are under severe pressure, and that's before we talk about the cost of disability issues and the wider cost of living crisis.
Deputy Dolan.
Taoiseach, in the statement from the Department of Taoiseach, where it highlighted the priorities, one area of key focus is obviously disability, and the Cabinet Committee on Disability is going to be trying to push forward with the National Rights Strategy for Disabled People 2025 to 2030. One key area that I believe the Government needs to focus on is on accessibility in our towns. Particularly, I'm talking about towns like Athenry, Tuam, Gort, Loughrea. These are towns in Galway East where in the last year we've seen progress towards greater accessibility, but we need to see more. And Taoiseach, I want to ask, what is your department going to be doing to focus on accessibility around our towns so that everyone has an equal opportunity to experience our lived spaces?
Deputy Whitmore.
Thank you. Taoiseach, I want to raise the proposed LNG plant with you. I know today that you stated that this was necessary from an energy security perspective. But Taoiseach, I have spent many hours going through the documentation for that very argument, and I really cannot see how this plant is required from an energy security perspective. I think there are alternatives ways of actually dealing with energy security. I think this plant will lock us into fossil fuel infrastructure, and I also think it is going to be an incredibly costly exercise, €1 billion over 10 years. So my question is, if an alternative is provided to you and the evidence is provided to you, will you give it serious consideration? I do think there's another way of dealing with this energy security issue, Taoiseach.
Deputy Quaid.
Taoiseach, the Mental Health Strategy, A Vision for Change, is now 20 years old, yet the State is still nowhere near providing the specialist multidisciplinary teams it promised for older people in that document. There are large parts of the country where the HSE has approved no occupational therapy posts at all for older adult mental health services, including Dublin South West, Limerick City and Tipperary North, Cork North and East and Cork South and West. There are no approved psychology posts in Kildare, West Wicklow or Donegal. These are essential therapies to help support older people and their families as they face mental health challenges in the context of ageing. But what makes this even more serious is the lengths the HSE went to obscure these shortfalls. In January, I was told that the HSE did not maintain data on approved posts for these services, which is frankly farcical. The HSE's own 2019 model of care for older persons, which contained clear staffing targets, disappeared offline shortly after I submitted my first PQ, only to reappear immediately after the media queried its absence. Taoiseach, what commitment can you give to the funding of multidisciplinary posts for older adult mental health teams?
Deputy Lloyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, you mentioned how housing is in the strategy to focus on housing and indeed on the delivery of affordable housing. Now, in my area, average house prices are now €680,000. The First Home scheme for affordable housing puts a limit of 500,000. In other words, if it's a new build, it can't be more than 500,000. So, your affordable housing schemes simply do not apply in Dún Laoghaire. Now, ordinary workers in Dún Laoghaire don't earn more because they earn in Dún Laoghaire. If you're a nurse or a teacher or a bank worker or a council worker, you don't earn more because you live in Dún Laoghaire. But your schemes are completely non-applicable, and that's true in many parts of Dublin, by the way, where house prices are way in excess. So what are you going to do? The LEHA funding, which was given out in the millions to developers, was supposed to be conditional on giving back houses of €300,000 or less when it was originally came out. That was abandoned. So in places like Cherrywood, now houses are where there was 15 million in LEHA funding given out on the condition there was supposed to be some affordable housing. We got no affordable housing, and the houses are coming in at €600,000 and €700,000. How are ordinary workers supposed to pay for houses at that price, and what are you going to do to deliver them some affordable housing, because your schemes don't apply in huge swathes of Dublin?
Deputy Keane O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, with respect to the policy priorities in your statement of strategy and the priority of children and education, you've told us repeatedly that you're doing everything you can to ensure there's an appropriate school place for every child. So why, Taoiseach, when a school comes forward and they want to provide additional classes, why are they facing so many roadblocks? Stapole and Educate Together, I've raised this with you before, are doing its absolute best to provide 2 badly needed new and additional autism classes. However, the Department of Education hasn't sanctioned them. Taoiseach, there's 50 children on a waiting list who need these additional classes to be provided. Children who need you and your government to step forward now and to act on this. So, Taoiseach, why have you not given the go-ahead, and will you ensure that the go-ahead is given for these 2 new additional classes?
Deputy O'Rourke.
Taoiseach, on the 5th of March, a large public meeting was held in Dunshaughlin and County Meath in relation to the shortage of mainstream junior infants classes for September 2026. I was there, my colleague Fiona Blake was there, your party was represented by your local councillor, the Minister's party was represented by the local councillor, and the independent TD was there. There is a commitment from the Department in written responses to me that families can be assured that all children who require a school place will be provided with one, but there's no indication at all when that plan will be in place or what the detail of it will be. And we're 3 weeks later, despite repeated correspondences, repeated asking. There are a number of clear proposals that were put forward by local principals and by the local community at the Gael School, at the Community National School. So can I ask, Taoiseach, will you contact the Department, the Minister for Education, and ensure that a response issues to this local community?
Taoiseach, I want to bring to your attention the condition of Gaelscoil Riada in Athenry. It's a fantastic school. It's the only Irish medium primary school in Athenry, but the school building is totally inappropriate. There's a number of issues, including toilets frequently blocking and overflowing, ongoing sewage drainage problems, raw sewage overflowing and spilling onto the school yard, and the sewage is flooding at the main entrance to the school, and the entrance was inaccessible in recent weeks as a result. These are deplorable conditions which pose a real serious health and safety risk to the entire school community. They are waiting since 2006 for a new school campus alongside Colashta and Ochry. They have been included on the NDP list for 26-27, but still haven't received clarity on a likely timeline and start date for construction. So in light of the circumstances, Taoiseach, can you engage with the Minister, ensure clarity is provided as soon as possible, that the project is accelerated and that support is provided to the school in the meantime to deal with these issues?
Taoiseach, the effectiveness of our national security framework depends not only on the capabilities of our security services, but also on maintaining the trust and confidence of the public. Now, the trust has been grounded in must be grounded in transparency, accountability and proper democratic oversight. And at present, however, the mechanisms available to this House to scrutinise national security policy remain limited in both scope and visibility. Strengthening the oversight role of the Oireachtas, while at the same time fully respecting the need to protect sensitive and operational information, would bring Ireland more closely in line with the international best practices. This issue takes an added importance as we prepare to take over the EU presidency in July, and our EU partners are looking to us for reassurances that their officials will be safe while visiting Ireland. So, Taoiseach, will you commit to expanding democratic oversight of our national security within the Oireachtas in order to strengthen public confidence and trust in this area? And I want to ask you about the investigation into the drone incident, President Zelensky's visit. When will that investigation be completed and reported on?
Taoiseach.
I thank all the deputies who raised questions on this issue. I think beginning, with Deputy Crowe, in terms of the Chris Centre in the University Limerick, which I have visited myself and particularly saw at first hand the excellent technology in respect of underwater remotely controlled drones, which can observe critical undersea infrastructure, be it subsea cables, be it gas interconnectors, and eventually offshore windmills and other key critical infrastructure that's vital to our economy and society. And in fact, when I came away, I said we need to build on this, and I do think we need a national centre that can develop this technology, because we can see all over the world, particularly in drone technology, how advanced it has become and how effective it is in many different manifestations and use. But the entire area of monitoring subsea cables with others, and indeed monitoring gas infrastructure, or indeed other interconnectors. We'll shortly have one with France, which will be live next year. This is very critical for our economy, and I think I've spoken to Minister Lawless about it. I've spoken to other ministers, and I've alerted them to the potential of this centre. So we'll do some more work on that. As I say, part of the role of Taoiseach is to coordinate, to drive certain initiatives. And that's an area that I commend you for visiting it. I commend you for raising the issue. And it's one that I intend to pursue with colleagues to see how we can advance the investment in that centre, because even the buildings and so on are fairly rudimentary, if I could say so. And as you said, there's huge potential there, and it's a cross-government approach that is required to support it. Deputy O'Murrough raised a specific case in terms of rising fuel prices, particularly the role of community nurses. And the role of community nurses is essential in terms of community-based healthcare and providing services to people on the ground. And again, we're 3 weeks into this war, and we are continuing to keep everything under review. And in particular, the cost issues for people. Now, we have announced a package of measures which is probably larger than most other packages of measures across Europe, but it's very much targeted, temporary, and we'll keep monitoring the situation to see how this unfolds. We do need to keep resources in reserve for any potential worsening of this situation. We need to keep an eye on impacts on the economy, and it's now March, and we have some distance to go to the end of the year. So we're being cautious, retaining flexibility, but very conscious of the pressures that many people are under. So hopefully the package will help to alleviate some of those pressures for people across the board. Deputy Dolan raised the issue in terms of accessibility, and he referenced Athenry, Gort, Tuam, Loughrea, and I would agree 100%. I have set up a disability unit within the department to make sure that every single government department is seized around the importance of disability services, and in particular the implementation of the human rights-based disabled persons strategy, which we launched last year, and we had a very good meeting with a lot of the groups in terms of the action plan and the implementation of the action plan around that. So again, we need to work with local authorities, TII and others, and NTA in terms of ensuring comprehensive accessibility for people with disabilities, along with other measures that we're contemplating, particularly replacing the existing mobility transport schemes that would be of benefit to people, and making them more flexible and accessible as grant schemes for people who want to adjust their cars, maybe not at the same level as the older scheme, but to have a tiered approach. And hopefully we'll be in a position to launch that next year, but to bring proposals to government shortly in respect of it, and then to get it worked up. Deputy Whitmore didn't outline what the alternative is, or even whisper it, in terms of an alternative to the LNG floating reserve infrastructure that we've decided to provide. And the advice is very strong that there is enormous vulnerability in terms of our energy security if anything was to happen to the interconnectors. We know that the Enter and other parts of the Russian Shadow Fleet have traversed over those pipelines. Our own undersea divers had to go down, and British undersea divers to check to make sure there was nothing untoward happening. So these are very real threats. In other seas, there has been disruption of pipelines. And so I'm very worried about it. I think it is a significant vulnerability, and hence the decision to proceed with the LNG floating infrastructure reserve. It would never be in itself have a sufficiency in terms of meeting the wider economic needs, so it's not going to in any way stop us from driving forward with the renewable agenda. And I outlined earlier in the House the degree to which we've made a lot of progress in terms of onshore wind in this country, and in terms of the degree of electricity generation that's caused by renewables now. But if you have an alternative, we're always open to alternatives, or not to ideas, and certainly would look forward to you submitting that to us. Deputy Quaid, in terms of specialist multidisciplinary posts for I think, senior citizens, again, we are in favour of providing multidisciplinary supports across the board. I think it's the most optimal way of providing healthcare at all levels, be it primary, community, or indeed in terms of inpatient services. And again, I'll talk to the Minister for Health and the Minister for Mental Health in particular in relation to these issues. There has been a lot of progress made on some fronts, on dementia in particular, on a range of supports, community-based supports that weren't there 5 years ago, that are there now. But that said, the need is there, and we'll certainly see what, how we can progress that even further. Deputy Boyd Barrett raised the very high house prices in Dunleary in his constituency. I acknowledge that. It is a very significant issue. We have, in an unprecedented way, provided a lot of state investment in housing, and particularly in certain schemes, not just First Home Scheme, in terms of the Help to Buy scheme, which has helped a lot of people to be able to buy homes, and also cost rental. Now, we need to do more. I mean, Shangana was the first major sort of development by the LDA, which had a broad mix of housing, from social to affordable, and it's accelerating its work, LDAs. And only yesterday I was at an investment where 550 odd houses will be provided on the Naas Road. Again, a mix of housing, which will be affordable to people and which involves cost rental also. But the most important way to deal with housing overall is to get supply up. And that means both public sector investment at unprecedented levels, which we are doing, but it also means a substantial private sector investment also to get to the levels of house building that are required to deal with population growth and the needs of young people to be able to get houses that they can afford. The Deputy O'Callaghan, in terms of school places, I don't have the answer to every specific request at every specific location in respect to special classes, but I know that the allocation to special education will be significantly way up on last year. The Minister will be responding to requests for special classes, but the numbers are way ahead of last year. Because of the early date, it seems to have opened up new, a level of applications that was not anticipated. And I think there's a lot of work needed and required to drill into that, to make sure that we have appropriate placements for children. But the ministers, Hildegard Naughton and Minister Michael Moynihan, will be doing everything they possibly can to secure places for all children, and they have the resources to do that. Deputy O'Rourke, shortage of mainstream junior infant classes. I didn't get the location, but again, in Dunshaughlin, again, I'll speak to the Minister in respect of that. There's a commitment there to provide school places, and I'm sure that will be realised and fulfilled. And particularly in areas of high population growth, there is a need to either have interim measures to make sure that children do get access to the places that they're entitled to and that they need. Likewise, Deputy O'Hara, in terms of Gael Scoil Riada, agus ad a bhíam go bhfuil dacrochtaí ann agus tuachláin an a bhórán ó thaobh banisteach na scoile, cé go bhfuil an struchtúr níl sé ar rúnach agus tá annach cuid le déanamh. So sewage, flooding, a lot of issues with the building. And again, I will talk to the Minister in terms of clarity around that particular project. Rose Conway Walsh, National Security Framework. This was the first Dáil, actually, where we had a committee of covering security and national security. I want to see democratic oversight. It does have to protect sensitive information, and there's a big question mark over the capacity of the Oireachtas to do that, if we're honest. Most committees don't really, can be fairly loosened with documents, but that's the nature of modern democracy in one respect. But some of the forces as well and services can let information out as well. So, but part of that, I think there's a review going on the way on that, I think, of the committee's remit.
Yes, there is, but
yeah.
obviously we're constrained to the job.
No, but there's a review of the
It's not happening.
standing orders, I think, is my understanding. I've discussed it with the Chief Whip. So we'll come back to you after this.
Thanks, Taoiseach.
But I accept the basic principle of democratic oversight of national security measures.
Okay, thank you. As it's now gone past 4:21, we'll move to the next item of business.